So I bought a Kins. It really doesn't have anything to do with this video. I just didn't really know how to intro it, and I wanted to show you guys. All right, so in case this is the first time you've watched one of these videos, we usually go over everything from the potential all the way to comparisons when it comes down to damage. To start things off, we'll talk about the potential. Here's how you figure those out. If you don't have the weapon, you can always check on the market, check other players, or head over to the Visiphone. PSO2, oh, actually, it's PSO2NA.ARC's Visiphone. I just type in PSO2 and then Visiphone, and it pumps right up. So not super difficult to find, but I'll leave a link in the video description as we usually do. Popping over to weapons, scrolling on down, and we can see the current tier of weapon. Now, we have two this time around. We're not just doing one, we're doing two comparisons, because I didn't want to separate this into two videos for you guys, so I figured I might as well make it easy. So if you're here for one or the other, you're stuck with both. We'll start with the Ascillusion comparison. However, this is actually pronounced, I'm just calling it Ascillusion, just because it's funny. But we have the Grand Illusion upgrade, the Ascillusion. So the Grand Illusion, of course, starts at 58%. The Ascillusion is basically the same thing, but it gets upgraded to 63% potency, a pretty massive potency jump. So it is a very strong upgrade, definitely worth its time. Doesn't take super long. I think it took me maybe, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 hours of grinding the LTQ to get my first weapon finished. And then, I mean, there's plenty of reason to grind it. There's lots of good drops if you're going after Leverance. You fight the boss for that, as well as a chance at a Kins. So definitely worth its time when you're going after the upgrade for the Ascillusion, if not just for your main weapon, for literally any of your other weapons you might be using. But here we are here to talk about the Ascillusion and the Leverance. So the Ascillusion is very simple, very straightforward. 63% potency, 5% crit rate, minus 10% PP cost consumption, and then 10% damage resistance. No really conditionals. These are just on all the time as long as you're using the weapon itself. As for the Leverance is a bit different. So Phantasm Surge unit. Leverance is 67%, which is pretty big. PB gauge plus 15% on attack. So on your attacks, you generate 15% more PB. All allies receive potency plus 2% for 15 seconds on photon blast activation. So you get a 2% damage buff. It says all allies receive. It sounds like you don't get, but from my understanding, at least of those who've used it so far, you do seem to get the bonus as well, but you'll have to correct me in the comments if that's not the case. So once that's done, they happen to have a Leverance, by all means, feel free. We're looking for your comment or below the video, but we'll have to see. Either way, so it receives a 2% potency buff for 15 seconds. Extend the effect duration 15 seconds on photon blast activation while effect is active. 30-second maximum extension starts 10 seconds after equipped. Now, so here's the thing, right? The person using Leverance uses their PB. You get a buff. You use your PB. That buff gets extended. From my understanding, the buff extension is for everyone, not just for one person. So as long as 3 people use their PBs together, the person with the Leverance and 2 other people afterwards, it should be a 45-second buff. Or, based on the way this is reading, is it caps out at 30 seconds. Basically, you get the buff from someone else using it, and then you extend only your own buff. I don't have a Leverance, so I can't personally test it. It's working one of those 2 different ways specifically. I'm sure, again, people are going to mention this in the comments, so by all means, feel free to check it out. In either situation, its use case is still exactly the same. The Leverance is really there for someone else to buff you with, without being hurt by not using a strong weapon. So, Tectors out there that are building PB like crazy, this is going to be a good weapon for you guys, but you're also not missing out, because as you can see, it's got a pretty high amount of base damage. The Leverance is at 1578, only 10 behind the Kins. Now the Kins is 65% where Leverance is 67. However, the Kins gets extra conditions that give it more damage. You've got 20% crit rate, 5% critical potency for 20 seconds after you do the full effect and everything like that. So that's a pretty strong amount of crit to allow for a pretty powerful weapon. Now, at the end of the day, it's up to you how you feel about this, but for me, at least personally, Leverance feels like one of those weapons you will pick up either as your main weapon as a Tector main, or as the main weapon for you if you're part of a group of players that play together that you know everyone else is going to be using a Kins, maybe an Asollusion or something along those lines, and you want to make sure that your group has the buff for everyone else. It's kind of like when you're building specific parties in MMOs or whatever, you want to make sure that someone has that party buff. Someone wants to be using the Leverance. In an optimal situation, at least one person has a Leverance. That way you're able to get that going. And it's about an average of, like, let's say 25% uptime overall when it comes to Leverance. So just keep that in mind. We're getting PBs pretty quick nowadays. We're getting reduction on cooldowns for PBs. I don't think there's any form of an ICD in here that I see. And this starts 10 seconds after the weapon is equipped. So you have to have the weapon equipped for about 10 seconds before you can just rip a PB and be good to go. So it does make for a pretty solid weapon swap, but not if you're using a KINS. Keep that in mind. If you're using an Asollusion, the problem here is that like the Asollusion's already kind of like weaker than the Leverance anyway. So using a Leverance off rip is still your better choice. And if you're using a KINS, well, you lose the bonus of the KINS itself when you swap off of it. And then you have a 100-second cooldown before you can get everything going again. So it's really not worth swapping off of this weapon, which is why I said it's going to be for someone like, let's say, a Tector or that one person in your group using the weapon itself that I would have a Leverance for. Now, just a heads up, we'll be switching over to the damage sim. That way you guys take a look at the percentages, see exactly what we're looking at here. It is a white Google Sheet, so flashbang warning in 3, 2, 1. So here we are over on Cakewalk's damage calculator. If you've watched these before, these needs no introduction, but if you haven't seen these beforehand, this is someone in the community who has made a damage calc for everyone to be able to utilize. A link will be in the video description, as it always is. I have plenty of videos explaining how this works. Basically, you just want to make sure you make a copy of it, file, make a copy, and then you can start editing the actual things that you can edit. Usually want to stick to these orange cells, nothing else as far as edits go. Cake is pretty consistent about that. We're going to be comparing the Grand Illusion at attack 5 to what the upgrades are going to be looking like. So let's slide on over and take a look, shall we? All right, so the Grand Illusion we got as our baseline at attack 5. You can see the Ascillusion is going to give you about a 3.4% damage bump from that. The Leverance is going to give you about a 6.6 damage bump, and you're probably thinking, oh, but it shows the Leverance ahead of the KINS. Yes, it does, because the Leverance is taking into account its a buff, which I think is a little bit weird when you're looking at the actual percentages. Because if you're looking at the weapon to itself, it's not stronger on a one-to-one comparison. However, if you're looking at the weapon in a group scenario, it is stronger, because this is based on 4-party uptime, meaning someone is helping you maintain the actual buff of the Leverance itself. If it was the stronger weapon, given the circumstances, you would just kind of go for a Leverance instead of a KINS. The thing about the Leverance is that buff that the Leverance is getting is applying to the KINS as well. So if you're using your KINS and someone else is using Leverance, then you're getting more damage than the Leverance by itself. If you're the only one using a Leverance, then technically no one else is getting the damage buff, you're getting more damage overall. So if it's like a by yourself situation, I think an Leverance might actually edge it out just a little bit, but it depends on the length of the actual fight itself. In the situation where, let's say, for example, you're able to get your PB going really quickly, you get a buff, then that's fine. But you're on your own, right? So you're not gonna be able to extend that up to 45 seconds or 30 seconds, or whatever it happens to be. So that's gonna be less. This is based on a 4-person situation. So you'll never be in the perfect case scenario, well, at least you'll most never be in the perfect case scenario where this Leverance is going to outweigh the KINS, outside of just looking at this specific situation where we're looking at the damage numbers, right? Because you're looking at this as a 4-time uptime. This KINS is only based on itself because it's only being buffed by itself. It's not getting the Leverance buff. If it was getting the Leverance buff, then it would push it over the Leverance itself. But then in a situation where you would just use a Leverance and you're not using the KINS, well, then you're by yourself, right? Or if you're in a 4-man party and no one else says anything and you just have a Leverance, well, the Leverance is really, really good. But if someone else had a Leverance and you had a KINS, that would still be even better. Hopefully this is making sense. It's kind of difficult to explain exactly, but the way this works out is essentially the Leverance is a very, very powerful weapon that is on par, if not slightly weaker than that of a KINS, point to point. In a situation where you use a KINS versus using Leverance, yes, it is better for you to use the Leverance unless someone else has the Leverance, then it would be better that you use the KINS. So I would usually recommend you pick up your KINS to make sure you have your consistent damage. Because if you're in a solo situation and you have a Leverance, it's not going to be stronger than a KINS. The KINS is still going to be stronger, and Leverance is going to fall behind. So at the end of the day, though, make your decision. Maybe you don't trust anyone else bringing a Leverance. Maybe you're like, you know what, someone else isn't going to bring a Leverance. I want to make sure that we have the buff uptime. That way our group has the most amount of damage possible. And if no one else has a Leverance and I'm not using a Leverance and I'm gonna use less damage, then yeah, that makes perfect sense. Totally understandable. By all means, go for it. Another situation where things are a little bit weirder or different is in the case of, funny enough, Termina. So Termina actually causes it to edge out the Leverance. However, it's only in the comparison of another Leverance, so it does push it up higher, but not more than a regular attack or a regular fatal, a regular Abandak build would be. This is still a situation where you're kind of looking at how can I put this? You're looking at RNG. In the case of the Kins, you have the best case scenario for yourself to end up with a high amount of damage in comparison with the Leverance, but you can see that it's much closer in that situation itself. Leverance and Tarmina just doesn't do well. And as far as the Asollusion goes, like it really doesn't really need much of an explanation. It is just a slightly stronger choice. Abandak always being the most consistent setup versus Wix being the strongest overall at the end of the day. So as you can see, when we get down here, you can see these are within a percentage of each other. And then you count for buffs and solo versus group play and all that stuff, and then things kind of lay themselves out. So if you're curious of like what's the end all be all, what's the actual comparison, what's our damage, what's our verdict, if you're using a Grand Illusion / upgrading to the Ascillusion, you're looking at about roughly I would say about a 2 to 3% damage difference. Again, this is all multiplicative. People always like, it's only 2 to 3%. Yes, understandably so, but the damage numbers go freaking crazy with PSO2. So small numbers make up large amounts of damage. Just keep that in mind. So realistically, you're looking at maybe a 3 to 4% damage difference when you are comparing something like, let's say, the Ascillusion to the Leverance. And reminder that they did mention that the Leverance will upgrade. And if the streets are to be believed, they're not the only weapon that's upgrading alongside the Ascillusion. So you got the Leverance upgrade, you got the Ascillusion upgrade, and if I need to explain the rest to you, well then you haven't been paying attention. And obligatory, if you're still using the Epith, for the love of Christ, stop it. It is now officially over 50% behind the current free weapons. Well, I guess it's about 50% behind, but it's now moving up to 50% behind, and this is after the upgrade. This is after they've upgraded it and given it default rings. So yeah, it's bad. It's very bad. Cut it out. That's all I've got for you guys today. If there's anything I missed, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe to keep with more. As always, thank you to the channel members. You guys are fantastic, and I appreciate every single one of you, as well as the Patreon members. We're going to get something going for Patreon, something a bit different. Patreon's kind of gotten into a weird spot, so apologies there, but we'll get that figured out for you guys as well. In case you're curious about, the blaster situation. Here you go. And then Unwix. Unwix is for just very specific enemies. It's good, but only in those situations, and I don't have to explain anymore, but that's pretty much it. Either way, take care, my friends. Peace out.